I would have more time. So
Yeah.
let's go. So let me put my presentation on. So you can see the full screen there. Hello?
Yes. Yes,
Oh,
Marcos.
Yeah.
thank
It's
you. Thank
perfect.
you for the
Yeah, it's very
feedback,
good.
because now I cannot see anyone. Okay, so
Yeah.
I'll start now. Actually, I'm going to tell you about the story of a project that is in this book, Psycholinguistics and Metacognition Education, em português, Psicolinguística e Metacognição na Escola. This was a 2-year project we developed in a public school in the state of Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. But before I go into the project, I'd like to share with you a few things. I have read this book and I was really impressed because it's a great scientific dissemination book and very integrative of ideas. I mean, people can discuss the ideas, but this guy has made a major job in terms of scientific dissemination. Uh, in this book, you see the bottom part, there are 3 stages at the base of the pyramid, which are counted in billions of years. He's a historian, he starts at the Big Bang, and then at the top, only 70,000 years from psychology to nowadays, and we don't know what comes next, right? But how can applied psycholinguistics help? So in his book, there's a graphic version of the book, and you can see here that actually 70,000 years only in terms of evolutionary scale, the cognitive revolution, there's the emergence of storytelling. You see, according to him, humans were around already 2 million years ago, but it was only 70. Then, well, sapiens came about 200,000, but then for many, many years, thousands of years, nothing very important happened until about 70,000 years ago, the cognitive revolution. Emergence of storytelling is a very interesting concept. And so I also read this 2019 article in which the author, Vyshevsky, from Boston University in the United States, he says that language evolution to revolution, the leap from rich vocabulary, non-recursive communication system to recursive language 70,000 years ago was associated with acquisition of a novel component of imagination called prefrontal synthesis. And this enabled a mutation that slowed down the prefrontal cortex maturation simultaneously in two or more children, which is called the Romulus and Remus hypothesis. I thought this is so interesting because that poses the question about what triggered the acquisition of imagination, storytelling, and art, and what is the possible role of language in this process. So in this article, the author discusses that modern children who are not exposed to recursive language in early childhood never acquired a type of active constructive imagination called prefrontal synthesis. Unlike vocabulary and grammar acquisition, which can be learned throughout one's lifetime, there is a strong critical period for the development of PFS, the prefrontal synthesis. And individuals not exposed to recursive language in early childhood can never acquire PFS as adults. And then that's so interesting because this is developed through dialogic communication using recursive elements, resulting in concurrent conversion of a non-recursive communication systems to recursive language and acquisition of PFS exactly, let's say, 70,000 years ago. As a story, I think this story is interesting. And now, I found so interesting in this article the comparison of prefrontal synthesis to linguistically defined merge. PFS is defined neurobiologically as the conscious, purposeful process of synthesizing novel mental images from two or more objects stored in memory. There's no linguistically defined process that is neurobiologically equivalent to this distinct mechanism of imagination. The closest in Spiritist Chomsky and merge defined as a process of combined any two syntactic objects to create a new one. Okay, so what's merge? This is what merge is. Very simple operation, very basic and simple operation, getting two lexical items in language together and forming and building a structure. And recursion is actually an epiphenomenon of merge. So that you can have a formula about what merge is. I like Tom Roper. I have been working with Tom Roper, that recursion may be characterized as an operation that takes its own output as input and has been argued to be unique to the human language faculty by Hauser, Chomsky, 2002. Of course, you can have direct recursion, which is coordination, indirect recursion, which is embedding or subordination. People have shown, I think, to my view, very convincingly, that juxtaposition, coordination appears earlier than embedding, which is hierarchy, in children's acquisition, comprehension, and production. So, of course, coordination is a flatter process, less complex in comparison to subordination, which there is hierarchical structuring. That's very interesting because you can put things in perspective if you take the idea of a hierarchy. So, for example, we have done lots of studies on this. In this book, we launched it in 2018. We examined several languages like Japanese, English, Spanish, Dutch, Portuguese, and also 11 Brazilian indigenous languages, showing that these languages all have recursive direct and indirect recursion, expressed by myriads of ways. Some use prosody, for example, to embed. Other use nominalization in order to embed. So it's such a varied kind of resource. Actually, we also, let me just show you a little bit of a night tracking experiment. People would see an image, and this is an individual length, Carajá, and this is coordination, which seems to be, and then they would have, of course, a question, and this is embedding. You see everything is stacked, and this is a little bit more difficult to process. So, for example, in Portuguese, we did a study that will also a sentence picture matching study in which people would see a picture like this, and then in Portuguese would say, tem flor no livro, no copo e na mesa. And they would have to check whether what they read matched with the picture. Like in English would be, there's a flower on the book, in the glass, and on the table. That's coordination, right? And then in comparison, people could see a picture like this, in which there's a stacking of the items, right? And people would read, tem flor no copo em cima do livro na mesa. There's a flower in the glass and the book on the table. Let's see some prototypical eye tracking we got in this study. For example, let's see here. You see? Can you see the fixation point? Oh, that's very simple to read. Now let's take a look when you have the stacking of elements. What happens typically? Regression, first pass regression, second pass regression, checks, and then go back. So that's very, very, very clear that embedding is harder to process than coordination. It doesn't mean that it's not very productive, but it's a part of the grammar. So we did, for example, using heat maps. These are so intuitive, right? You just check the red parts, got more latencies of fixation. This is coordination. Now, if you see embedding, take a look at the sentence below. It requires more fixations, more intense fixations. It requires refixations. So that's research like the orange line. You see the flatter coordination structure, and then you see in recursion, especially, that's so interesting because when people realize they are in a recursive set, in an embedding set, then they go up, but then they tend to go down in terms of fixation times. Okay, so some conclusions we had, I already talked to them. Sorry, I'm going to speed up a bit. So the acquisition of complex recursion allowed Homo sapiens to develop the autonoietic capacity of space and time travel, going beyond the limits of the immediate experience of here and now. When you can arrange things, and language allowed us to do this, to arrange things in a hierarchy, in a perspective, then we can go beyond the here and now experience. So that's what autonoietic consciousness is. Ability to mentally, we can go to the future, can go to the past, because we can put now things in perspective, and we can structure things by means of language and by means of recursive language. So this is basically what metacognition is, right? Metacognition is some sort of a secondary plane communication, because you have a first system, and then a second and a third system, and metacognition is what it is. So metacognition is related to recursion. And also there are people like Metcalfe and others that they have seen the role that metacognition has had in the evolution and human mind. Some people even say, like these two authors, Terrace and Metcalfe, that this is actually the missing link in cognition, is metacognition, which I think fantastic. And of course, you have first order, second order, third order. Like your first order, they say, there's no white, but then second order say, Tom believes there's no white. Third order might be, Tom wishes that Jim believes that snow is white, and that might go on and on and on. And of course, our memory would interfere, but potentially we can do this ad infinitum. And this is basically theory of mind, which is a very sophisticated form of metacognition, right? In which people are able to put themselves in the perspective of the others, attribute, assign false belief. That's a very interesting area of research. And this article, which was passed to me by Gilles de Villers, who is one of the main authors in the study of metacognition from University of Massachusetts. And that's very interesting because before this article, using eye tracking, people would think that 25-month-old infants could not anticipate an actor's actions. So see an example, you'll see this is the gaze of a child, a typical gazing of a child before 25, and you can notice, sorry about that, I'm going to show this, it's so interesting. There's a bell which is going to ring, and then this person here has looked the other side, and the child is going to notice that, and there's going to be a puppet that's playing around with a little ball, and then the child knows that the ball would not be here, but he anticipates that the woman is going to get this window. So let's take a look at this, which is very interesting. So you see this is the gaze of the child. And the first moves are just for people to get for the child to get the gist of the situation. So the little bear appears and moves things out of place. Now, the child is following it so attentively, right? They're going to place it there. And the child noticed that the woman, look, that the woman is following the whole situation. then predicts where the woman is going to go, and the woman is going to go to the box on the right. But then there's going to be some sort of a bell. Maybe you will not be able to hear there, but the woman is going to look the other way. And he's following, he's paying attention to the woman as well as to the puppet. Little bear puts the ball in the box in the right. He notices that the woman is following. Now the woman's looking the other way. Look how the child looks toward. Wow, she's not seeing it. The bear is taking it out. Look, you see the speed of the saccades and everything, and look at the size of the balls, which shows the time. The child. Wow, she didn't see. Now look. She knows that the ball's not there, but she is expecting that the woman would go there. So before 25 months, the child is really capable of attributing false belief. That means can go to a secondary representation system of reference. Right? So primary, second systems, representation systems, I'm going to go through metacognition, thinking about thinking, and it has a very important role in learning, of course, because then we can think about what we're doing, reflect on our performance. So based on this idea, some people say that this is really what makes a difference for human beings. Like other animals have other abilities, hawks have better vision than humans, uh, bats have a sonar system, and also pangolins, people are saying even that they have evolutionary advantage against coronavirus. But what is the evolutionary advantage of us, which is work in progress? And some people think it is actually metacognition and the ability to use recursive language to structure things. So that's what metacognition is and how it is related to recursion in cognition and in language. So probably that's what we are, what kind of creatures we are. We are recursive creatures, creatures who have language, who are able to embed in their control and the structure perspectives, different perspectives. And that's what metacognition is, right? And that has a central importance in the evolution of human consciousness. So we can escape from being stimulus bound and allow self-control of their learning actions. And of course, there are processing difficulties. I mean, it's not because we have this ability. People, as Chomsky says, people know things and people do things. And these are two different dimensions which should not be confounded, right? For example, there's this typical in psycholinguistics history. For example, Kimball showed two-sentence principle. For example, if you have the producer hire a new director who fired the actress, who sued the broadcasting company, well, this is complex, but its relative clauses are attached to the right. So not so hard to read. Look, typically, you can read a sentence like this in Portuguese and answer a question about it correctly in about 13 fixations. Of course, the last one's the wrap-up moment, in which it's an integrative moment in which he is parsing or she is parsing not the constituent, but the whole sentence. But 13 fixations basically were able to. Now let's see if we center embed the actress, that the new director, that the producer hired, fired, sued the broadcasting company. So let's see this sentence now. As embedding several levels, right? But center embedding is hardest. Kimball had already shown it, this two-principle system, two-sentence principle. So you see the difference between the two, differences in readability, which are caused by structural complexity. So this is another very interesting article in Frontiers, talking about acceptability, grammaticality, and the role of the parson in this story. It is a fascinating time, but still school methodologies are not always dialogic. You see how dialogic processes are important, how you can place yourself in the role of the other, and this has played a major role in evolution. But in the meantime, at many schools, what we see, at least in Brazil, and in Brazil, it's a very serious issue. People have to receive from outside, like sort of behaviorism, in which things have to be memorized from outside. That's what Paulo Freire, this article, Roberto Lent, an important neuroscientist in Brazil, has shown. Roberto Lent says that Paulo Freire talking about the importance of being dialogic in education, right, of active methodologies in which the students are protagonists is so important because it can trigger other processes. Sorry about that. Let's see. And then he mentions this article, brain-to-brain synchrony tracks real-world dynamic group interactions in the classroom, which is fantastic. They use what they call hyperscanning of EEG. So at the same time the teacher is teaching, there is a promediation of brain waves with the teacher, and when it's active kind of learning, in which students take an active part, then there seems to be that the brain waves are in synchrony. Roberto Lent says maybe we are, for the first time, capturing the moment of learning. So, but if they are the teachers teaching, saying, talking, and students are just thinking about whatever, then you don't have the same synchronicity of brain waves. So one of the conclusions of this hyperscanning article is that students' brain waves are more in sync with each other when they are more engaged during class. So these are very interesting ideas that suggest that language metacognition may be used as an epistemic tool, right? In the sense, and especially nowadays in which we are in this infodemic moment. And that was interesting that the World Health Organization last year had this first infodemiology conference. Infodemiology says about the excess of information, the low quality of information, such as fake news and all this manipulation we are suffering in the world. Pandemic requires epidemiological vigilance, and the infodemic we live today requires epistemological vigilance, and schools may be a role to fully develop metacognition and abilities which are not developed in traditional school, like Paulo Freire said, like bank kind of schools. So, especially in the world in which hybrid warfare, misinformation, fake news, deceit, misleading manipulation are working every day, are there for manipulating minds and hearts, right? Manufacturing consent, as Chomsky has called it. Society, and this was said by Chomsky in a talk he gave in Brazil 2 years ago at Abralin. Societies are being attacked by systematic actions of thought and emotion control. And this works, but we are not like that. We're more than that, right? People don't know what's happening. They don't even know that they don't know. So metacognitively, and then societies give a limited spectrum for people to think about, but they don't go beyond that. Many people, education is a system of imposed ignorance. And even Darcy Ribeiro, our Brazilian anthropologist, used to say that the crisis of education in Brazil is not a crisis, it's a project. And PISA results show Brazil, you see Brazil in the last quarter of the evaluation of reading, mathematics, and science. People spend 11, 12 years at school and then cannot read well, cannot express themselves well, mathematical reasoning, And you see the red countries, like Brazil is there, and other countries in the world also are below the minimum 450 score in PISA. And PISA is being given, and the World Development Report, comparing several instances of the PISA test, they say, well, there's some improvement, but at the current rate of improvement, they won't be able to reach the rich country average for 75 years in math, and in reading will take more than 260 years for people read in the red countries like Brazil at the same levels of more developed countries. Of course, this is related to investment in education. Since the 2016 coup of state in Brazil, you see investments in education and sciences coming down very critically. We founded the National Network of Science for Education, and one of the things is that the question the network asks is, how can you use the different techniques used in scientific research to help learning process? What is the way to integrate the scientific method to teaching? Okay, so psycholinguistics can be an epistemic tool at the school, and that's the program we have been developing. Let me see how long I have. Just 5 minutes. Okay, I have to. Maybe I won't be able to show you properly because I made a mistake with the timer I think had been allotted to my talk. So, the faculty of language, a biological object, a window into the mind and the bridge across disciplines, is an article that we translated into Portuguese, was written by Ángel Gallego in Noam Chomsky 2020. And he says that we need little objects. School needs little objects so we can go deeper, qualitatively, rather than the big, huge amount of subjects and content matters that people are exposed to in school. So in terms of reading, case for the sentence is an excellent little object, which should be paid more attention. That's what we think. And then people looked using eye tracking at this Finland schools. They have found that linear readers are characterized by the absence of fixations, returning to previous texts, whereas the reading of structured selective readers is characterized by lookbacks to previous critical areas of sentences. Based on this, eye tracking technology has been applied in educational research to develop metacognitive skills, even in the teaching of chemistry. And this Mason, Plukino, and Tornatora have been using eye tracking technology as an indirect instruction tool to improve text and picture processing learning. So how can eye tracker become education? They are non-intrusive. People can get aware of their reading patterns and of the reading patterns of other readers, and they can form science-forming capacity and improve reading standard. So these authors call it the eye movement modeling example, and can be observation learning, self-regulatory processes. So this is syntactic metacognition, and people have to have, when you have recursion, you have different hierarchies, you have different perspectives, you have theory of mind, you can place yourself in the side of the other, which is in need in modern societies. That's the idea of perspective, perspectivation, viewpoint. People can look at newspapers and the same article may be using different perspectives, and people are not aware of that. Even in soccer games, the same game, you can stress one aspect rather than the other. People are victimized by information manipulation, they are misinformed. So we did this project, Linguistics for Basic Education, and we got a pool of labs together, and we developed this project for 2 years. last years of middle school, we did the diagnostic tests based on the evidences. We did workshops, and then we retested in comparison and control. We used the eye-tracking Tobii TX300. This is partly in these two books, and the book to the right, you can read the whole story. So basically, I have to go on. What we found is that, you see, first, the test, we had the main clause as the gist, so the second part. What happens is that people, you see, like we compared with higher learning students, they go up in the main clause, and then they go back. And what happens with middle schoolers is that they engage a lot at the beginning of the sentence, and they go down in the fixation attention. Of course, in terms of regressive looks, people, the high learning students, they have twice as much look backs than middle schoolers. And of course, when you go check the comprehension, accuracy is twice as much at college students than middle schoolers. But then what we do, so that's an example, a typical example. So you see this area here is the main clause, which is the gist in the high learning student and the college student. And you see how typically middle schoolers, they engage a lot at the beginning, and then they look less and less. This one even got to the end, some disengage before the end of the sentence. And then we did workshop with eye tracking. That was very motivating. We took the eye tracker to the schools. People would look at different heat maps and gaze plots. For example, we would show them reading like this. This area here, second clause, is the main clause. And you see the good reader, he's going to come back here. Look, wow, yeah. Look back there. This is the look back, which allows them to get the accuracy question right. But then if you see one case in a middle schooler, wow, just read a part of it, then went away. Of course, he's going to make a mistake in accuracy because he didn't even read it. That's the role of prediction there too, which is a very important role. We can use dynamic heat maps, and students were so motivated. This was so engaging, and they were like scientists making hypotheses and having the same joy that we psycholinguistics have in our labs. And that seems to have worked, because then in the retest, we got things much better. I have to finish. So let's see an example of a middle school student who did not take part in the eye tracking and other workshops that we have developed. So this area here, this area I'm showing you here, is the gist. It's the main clause. So let's see what happens with a student, a middle schooler who did not take the workshops. Well, lots of attention in the first clause, and then just disengage, and of course, is going to make a mistake. Now, let's see a student who did take part in the workshops for 3 months. We took the eye tracker. Look, this is the main clause. He's going to have a first pass regression, second pass regression, you see, and then he gets it right. This is a college student. A college student has about the same pattern now, but it's faster. It's faster. Look, this is the critical area. Okay, again in the critical area, this is the typical look back, and then of course he makes it right. So you see people who did not, the middle schoolers who did not take the workshops, these are college students, these are middle schoolers who took the workshops, and these are controls like ensino superior, which is college students. And of course, again, in general, it's possible to note in online and offline measures taken in the experiments that a middle school student who participated in the workshop approximated the performance of a group of undergrads, distancing themselves from the middle school group, which kept just normal class at school. because these are active workshops. So a translational object, that's what it's about, as translational science you take in the lab into the school, would therefore have been achieved, demonstrate that identification of the point of view, the sentence, the gist, would have been significantly impacted by the metacognitive eye-tracking workshops developed during 2 months at the school. These activities would have propelled self-reflexivity, contributing to transform incomplete linear readers into selective structuring readers, capable of identifying different perspectives and points of view. Of course, we would like to remain at the school testing if this would persist and everything. Okay, let me see this as I was going back. Okay, now we have this book in which we have exercises to promote active education using language, using recursion, using co-reference, using quantifiers, and we're doing this at the schools. So thank you very much. Sorry about speeding up. I think I'm beyond my allotted time anyway. Thank you very much.
Yes. Thank you very much,
you.
Professor Marcos. Thank you very much. Very nice presentation. Lots of insights. I'm sure everybody has.
Nice presentation, Marcos.
Thank you, Leonor. If you have any questions, I'm glad.
Magnific.
Help us think about this. I think this should be a priority because we should go to the schools. Psycholinguistics should indeed go to the schools and help. José Moraes, I said that in an article. That's past the time that scientists should influence the schools. I mean, this is, I think, in my view, this is the most urgent thing we should all. Leonor has been doing that for many years. She's always our example. And that's, I think, very important for us to do. Otherwise, there may be no word ahead. And that's not an exaggeration, I think. People have not realized the moment we're living may be a point of no return. That's the feeling of urgency that I feel in terms of environment, in terms of education, in terms of science. And is no kid's game. That's very serious, I think. That's my feeling. And thank you for giving me the chance to share these ideas with you, scientists, and maybe we can, if you get together, if we cooperate, if we are sensitive to each other's cooperation skills and ability and possibilities, rather than competition. I think this is not the moment. I would hate to go back to what people call normal. I want to go back to normal. That normal was abnormal and led us to this situation. I have to build a new normal, and that's urgent. And if we don't do that, maybe we won't be here, and our future generations may be jeopardized forever. Midnight clock is 2 seconds to midnight. So I think there's no time to waste.
Thank you, Marcos. Thank you very much. I think we could maybe, if we have the time after Professor Jacques' talk, we could open for questions and comments. Sure. Yeah. Okay. Right. So, Professor Jacques, the floor is yours. You can open your mic.
Yes,
maybe.
There it is.
Yes,
I try to open a window. If you get it, that's fine. I will work from it. Share. Do you get it? Hello?
Yes, we can see.
Yes.
Do you get it?
Yes, we can see.
You can see it. So I'm going to work on it since first, that presentation is a lot too long, so it has to be sped up. I will not be the first one today, but I will be the second one to speed up things. That PowerPoint was mostly done for Portugal and hasn't been remade. So you have all the possible mistakes that were at the time. That's if I go to the next, that's where we should have been last year, and we were not. And that's my first slide that is interesting, and it is fundamental. Phylogeny, of course, has a Y and not an I, but that's only a misspelling. Homo sapiens started because Homo sapiens, and that's the difference with all the other homos before him, was or became a fast bipedal long-distance runner. And that is fundamental. Homo sapiens got out of the forest into the savannah, and he started running to hunt, and he started running to escape some animals. This fast bipedal long-distance runner concept introduced a lot of transformation, physiological transformation in Homo sapiens, and that happened not 200,000 years ago, but at least 300,000 years ago. It started then. That the first thing that is transformed is the foot itself. I don't have a picture here, but I can go to the next slide and give you the various mutations, genetic mutations that were absolutely indispensable for Homo sapiens to become that fast runner. The first one is a deep larynx, because it is the pump of deep breathing, and there is no long distance running if there is no deep breathing. The second one, which is very complex, is the subglottal, the glottal, and the tongue and mouth innovation, or innovations if you want, but it's mostly one innovation with several nerves. And that innovation is absolutely indispensable because there is no deep breathing mechanics if we don't control the subglottal, the glottal, and the tongue and mouth regions in the breathing process. The third one is a diaphragm. The diaphragm is the regulator of the breathing power. It has to be first changed, mutated into what it is in a human being today, and it hasn't changed since then. It is fundamental for deep breathing, and this diaphragm has to be trained. That's something else. The lungs are the breathing apparatus and the blood connector, indispensable to bring oxygen to the body. And then the heart, of course, is the blood pressure regulator and oxygenization, and the heart has to be trained too, to be up to the long distance running. And altogether, you have to think of the coordination of all these various organs, and it is the Broca area, which is the main coordinating area in the brain, and all that has to be done through a lot of training, because the legs, the arms, the whole body are supposed to run along with the runner, and every single thing, every single element of the body, plus all the organs we have said, are supposed to be coordinated. That's essential. And that those mutations, as you can see, those mutations are indispensable for running, but they have a side effect. They enable Homo sapiens to start the bigger mutation towards language, because before he inherited from the previous or his ancestors some kind of system of chords that could be complex and rich with Homo erectus, with Homo ergaster, or with even the distant cousin Neanderthals and Denisovans, but he is able to multiply the number of consonants and the number of vowels. The most advanced apes that have been studied as for language have about 3 vowels and about 4 or 5 consonants, and they only have chords. That is to say, they produce 8 or 9 chords with those means. If it were a human being using those reduced, those limited means, we would produce 125 or 150, maybe a little bit more items, what we would call words eventually. The power, and that's what comes next, when you have this, these mutations are acquired, are totally in the invested in body. If the body has changed and all those mutations are active in Homo sapiens, that gives him the possibility to start the linguistic voyage, and it is a long voyage. First step, the rotations of vowels and consonants. The rotations of vowels and consonants gives roots and root languages. Root languages are all the languages that are in Northern Africa, and they have moved slightly into the Middle East with some of them, and late anyway, that movement. Those root languages became root languages because they left the original nest and they kept the level of development that was in the nest at the time, and they left Black Africa to move to Northern Africa and eventually later a little bit to the Middle East. Those root languages are what we call Semitic languages. They are also called Afro-Asiatic languages. That's the same thing. The second stage, because in the nest in Black Africa, the evolution of the linguistic ability of Homo sapiens went on developing, and they reached a second level. The second level is that those roots that are just plain roots, nothing else, and they don't change. They are very limited in possibilities. The second stage, those roots are specified in spatial elements and temporal elements, categorization, if you will, and those become stems, and those are the basis of isolating languages. And that's where I would disagree with Mr. Harari, because these, when in a black African nest, when human beings got to that level, there was a mutation, and that mutation has to be dated, and is dated actually, and it is around 120,000 years before Christ. That is a long time before the 70,000 revolution that some are proposing nowadays. Whereas the root languages, they moved out of the Black African nest at least 200,000 years ago. If we believe recent findings in Morocco, they actually would have reached Morocco 300,000 years before Christ. And if they are moved out of Black Africa, then they establish themselves in that northern part of Africa, which is not black anywhere, or mostly not black nowadays. The stem languages are isolating languages. They moved out of Black Africa from Djibouti, then the southern Arabian corridor, then Hormuz, and then they got into Central Asia, and from there they spread all over the Asia, completely the whole Asia, and they met the Denisovans that we only discovered 10 years ago or 15 years ago, and those are essential. And that's not finished. The story goes on in Black Africa with the third level, where those categorized stems are this time invested into or become the carriers of various functional elements, temporal or spatial functional elements, and that gives you another migration, and that's a migration that started around 70,000 years ago, and that went to the same route, the same way as the previous one, but instead of going to Asia, they moved to the Middle East, and from there they moved up along the Caspian Sea on the eastern side of the Caspian Sea, and they went to Urals, they went to Russia, and another migration from the Middle East went through Anatolia and eventually the Caucasus, and they got into Europe, and they were the first Europeans, what we call the older Europeans, and they spoke languages from that third level of linguistic phylogeny with fronds, and those languages were Turkic languages, and they are still there in the zone I've just said. The last migration is just at the same time and the same phylogenic development, just a little bit later, a second wave of that migration, and they will stay on the Iranian plateau, and then we'll move later on after the Ice Age peak, that is after 19,000 BCE, probably around 12,000 or maybe 15,000 BCE, they moved east to the Indian subcontinent, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and India, and they moved west. Two different routes, one through the Caucasus into the big plains of Europe, another one through Anatolia and then Greece and along the Mediterranean northern coast. And those are the Indo-Europeans. And the Indo-European languages only arrived in Europe around 12,000 at the most 12,000 before Christ, and probably a little bit later. That phylogenic history of language is fundamental, and with the various migrations out of Black Africa, which is generally forgotten by most historians. We are going to speed up now. I think we can do that. Yeah. Those are the migrations. I've just explained them. Then all that has been published and explained in this book, which is a big book. And then we come to what is fundamental and what is fundamental. And then I'm going to meet other people that have already spoken and in this conference. What is common to all humans nowadays and all Homo sapiens, and with a possibility before them? That's the communicational situation. The communicational situation is based, and I'm going to take the case of the newborn, a newborn, let's say, but before his birth, because it starts before his birth, a newborn has already in his memory a certain number of clusters of sounds, articulated sounds, of course, which are the names of his brothers and sisters, the words that the mother during the pregnancy used regularly. So the names of the brothers and sisters and a few other words. He is born, and that is a trauma for that little child, since he gets from a continuation in the womb, a continuous situation, he gets into a disruptive situation where he has to learn very fast a few things. And the few things he's going to learn, first, he may start hearing the clusters of sounds, and he will find out that they correspond to people or elements, objects, and so on. A reference will be added to those clusters, and he will start getting his first words in his mind. He doesn't speak, but he can hear, and that is what is essential. That is missing in many approaches. The brain is the brain, but the brain builds through experience a mind, and the mind is the power of humanization, is the element that is essential for humans to develop as humans, and that mind develops something else, which is language. Language and mind develops along parallel routes and even reciprocal rules. One improves, the other one follows, and then the other one improves and the first one follows. And that's the communicational situation that is the regulator of that process. When the baby is born, he has to learn within 5 minutes or 10 minutes. He has to learn how to communicate, because he has to satisfy his needs, and that starts very fast. And he is going to find out that he has a tool in himself that is very useful for that satisfaction. He needs to cry, and if he cries, that cry becomes a call, and when he emits that call, there is a callee somewhere, and that callee is going to become the one who is essential for his survival, that is the nurturer. The nurturer becomes the responder in that communication, and that responder is going to provide the help, the care, something that will satisfy the need of the newborn, and then the newborn is this time the respondee, that is to say, is the one who will be satisfied. This situation, and we could go on into linguistic, we could show that this communicational situation is the very matrix of all human communication and of language. If you want to transpose this, the previous communicational situation you had before, you transform it linguistically, and you have an agent source, the newborn, a relation, e-calls, a message, which is the call itself, and a goal, which is the nurturer. The nurturer becomes the agent source in the response. The relation is the response, and the item provided is what satisfies the need of the newborn, and the goal is the newborn. And this is the basic structure of any sentence, any utterance in human languages, no matter what language. You can find that structure in practically in all human languages. And then if you want to understand what happens with a newborn, you have to understand his psychology and how he evolves. And there I find in Jacques Lacan's the best representation of the psychology, the psyche of a subject. And this is extremely important, but I'm not going to spend too much time there. I'm going very fast. You have the art, which is the body, the physiology. You have the ego, which is the ego of the individual, the subject. The subject is building a super ego or ideal of ego, or the phallus as Lacan called it, and that phallus is what the ego is projecting into some kind of virtual future, what it would like to be, what it would like to become. And this is, of course, under the whole process is under the influence of this autre, that is to say, the other, the authority that is outside the child, that is the mother, the father, then the teacher, the school, society, and so on. And this also is the basis of the construction of the thread of the three persons of human languages, and that happens, according to Lacan, when the child recognizes his own picture in a mirror. Is what you call a mirror stage, and there he recognizes himself. That is to say, he discovers that he is an I, he is a me, he is a myself, and anything in that image in the mirror, which at once will enable him to differentiate the you, the other that are close up, the nurturers among others, but they're just around him. And then later on, with time, with experience, he will discover that there are people that are outside this close circle, and that will be the third party and the third person. There again, in that basic communicational situation of a child that is born and that lives, there is about a year and a half, is going to start speaking. You have the matrix of all languages with variation that that would be that's another story. If we go on with that, we get to what is the real subject I would like to deal with. It is audiovisual machine, that is to say, television, and of course, artificial intelligence beyond. When a child is confronted, and is nowadays confronted very early to those things, audiovisual machines and screens, he is confronted to something that is for him real. What is on the screen is real. He will discover later on that it is not maybe that real. But that is a real important point in the development of a child, the discovery that those screens are animated and they represent things that are outside his immediate circle and yet inside. And that leads to a certain Mr. Jaron Lanier and what he called haptics. The child is living with his haptics, and the haptics are all the senses of the body, the fundamental physiological senses of the body, and they are differentiated from the eye and the ear. And their eye and ear, that's the connection with the screen. The haptics, that's the connection with the world. And the eye and the ear can also be the connection with the world. But this is another model that shows how a child is learning how to live in the world by haptically grasping that world as much as by looking at it and listening to it. And that leads, or would lead me, since we are dealing with television and artificial intelligence, that would lead me to another intellectual, which is Marshall McLuhan, and the concept of synesthesia. That is to say, when you are in front of a screen, you don't look, you don't listen, you actually capture within seconds the world that is on the screen with all your senses, haptics, eye and ear, all your senses, and you have to agree with it or reject it. If you agree with it, you go on watching. If you reject it, you just zap. This synesthesia is connected with a sensory motor component of our body, of our being, and that leads to three different reactions, let's say, in front of the world: action per se in the real world, language communication fundamental and central in the whole process, lucid dreaming, as Jaron Lanier says, or virtual reality, and that where we're coming to the revolution of virtual reality that Jaron Lanier actually worked out, is the third element, which is the virtual world. The virtual world, which is essential for our own life and survival. And then you have there, you get to the school business, to education, and that is essential, but I'm going to go very fast there. It is Antoine de la Garandrie, Pedagogical Back Summarizing, and this is a Christian approach to education, which is more than Christian, actually, which can be considered as basic, but in France it is a Catholic, or he was a Catholic intellectual, so he was considered, and he was working in Catholic schools and Catholic universities, so it was considered as being marginal. In fact, it is essential. You cannot learn if after learning or after being introduced to the new learning in a way or another, you don't integrate that new learning into your old learning by restructuring your old learning into a new advanced or newly developed learning. If there is not that process of integration and restructuring, there is no learning per se. There is just memorizing. And that's what Lagrange insisted upon, and he is not the only one. When you have done that, you have to summarize what you have learned and what you haven't learned. And by summarizing what you have learned, that helps you restructuring your old knowledge into a new knowledge. And of course, they get to, because language, the main object of language is conceptualization. The main object of education is conceptualization. And of course, we get concepts like that. A dog, there cannot be two children who will have the same image of a dog. And yet, they will all agree that a dog is a dog. And look, I've just given you a few pictures of what a dog can be for children or for grown-ups, actually. And that leads to experiential learning, which is ternary and not binary. It's not a student and a teacher. It's a lot more complex. It is an ego, a mind, and a language on one side. It is an outside world, outside physical world on the other side, and a long process from the ego to the outside physical world, existential, cultural, relational, or sensorial sphere, and from the ego to the outside world, under or over it's not a question of which one is over or under. An other, more abstract approach of the physical world: ideology, religion, science, technology, and experimentation. And I insist, religion and science are exactly in the same mental process. It is trying to capture the outside world and give an explanation of this outside physical world. Conceptualization is a fundamental operation, a mental operation of human beings, of Homo sapiens. It is based, and it doesn't exist if there is no language. It is based on language, and it is based on different moments in the capture of the outside world. If I follow Bertrand Russell, for instance, it starts with sensation, and then that become perceptions in the brain, and the brain has to discriminate in those perceptions, discriminate elements, patterns that are memorized by the brain in brain machine code. And it is when language comes into the picture that those brain machine codes are transformed in three moments. First of all, speculation. You use the words and see what happens. Experimentation, do go on with that kind of seeing what happens, and you start thinking, what is it? Conceptualize little by little, and it gets you to conceptualization. They're the best, as far as I know, the best way or approach of conceptualization is that by Vygotsky, the Russian psychologist and pedagogue in the 1920s and 1930s. And when this happens, conceptualization, then you can enter in another level of experience. And that level is synesthesia and hypermedia, McLuhan and others. All sensorial discrimination is fundamental. You like or you dislike. If you like, you stay tuned, approve, support. If you dislike, you, and so on. And zapping is the way to get away from what you dislike. If you add artificial intelligence and 5G into that pattern, you can find out that with artificial intelligence and 5G, the machine is becoming an actor in your own capture of the world. You are being formatted by the machine at the same time as you use the machine to format the world. And it is a reciprocal formatting, one and the other. And we can wonder at times if some are not, or some people are actually independent in front of that. This brings the child and AR 5G. You must understand then that the child, the ego, his impulses and his phallus is Lacan's term, superego if you prefer, plus the existential knowledge he has accumulated and built thanks to the language. And this child is going to be confronted with the authority of society, the family, school, and so on. And on both sides, you're going to find 5G school teachers and didactic AI, artificial intelligence. This is the outside world, the school side of the outside world, the learning side. And on the other side, you have the outside world, which is home, the parents, and all the people who are around the family and the parents. And 5G come into that, security, artificial intelligence, and all kind of managing machines in the home and around the home. And this is another conversation for the child. The child is confronted to those three things, and he has to live up to them if he can. I skip this one, but don't go too fast. Yeah. There, I skipped that one too. We come to, at this moment, one of the theories of the world of 5G, artificial intelligence, and so on, the singularity by Ray Kurzweil. Ray Kurzweil is a funny intellectual because he subsumes from vague knowledge, scientific knowledge. It subsumes that in 2050, machines will be more intelligent than human beings, that we will have hundreds of thousands of nanobots in our veins and body, and that we will be managed by those nanobots so that we will be able to live forever. He has even published a book where he gives his diet to be able to survive up to 2050 so that I could get the advantages of those nanobots. Ray Kurzweil rewrites in plain English, I would say, the Messianic Jerusalem of the Old Testament of the Bible. That is his basic culture, actually, since it is his basic culture. The point is that many intellectuals who are trying to give a utopia or a dystopia of the future actually only rewrite classics like the Bible, rewrite the Old Testament or rewrite the New Testament, the Apocalypse, and poor John is imitated in so many ways. But the first one, or not the first one, but one of the most important intellectual in our world nowadays, and he is an old one, who was also rewriting the Messianic Jerusalem, is Karl Marx with his future of communism, when history will end, when there will be no classes, when and so on and so on. You know the myth of Karl Marx. And that kind of rewriting the classics of our Western religions is absolutely amazing. And it is, you can find it in many works, books, and so on. Then let's go speed up a little bit beyond Homo sapiens, and that's probably what is most interesting. We have reached, I've just heard before me, that we are at 2 seconds before midnight, or 2 minutes before midnight. Yes, we are. That is to say, Homo sapiens per se is going to evolve, is evolving. Now, is it possible to invent a fourth dimension, a new articulation in language? What could that fourth articulation in language be that would enable us to include in our thinking the intelligent machines that we are inventing? And I say include in our thinking. I don't say include in our body like Mr. Kurzweil. I don't want to become an android dominated by hundreds of thousands of nanobots in my body who are communicating among themselves in my body, and with all the millions of nanobots outside my body in other bodies. We would become puppets in that kind of perspective. The machines will have to be integrated in our thinking, in our action, but not in our bodies. That's absolutely that's delirium tremens of intellectualism. The fourth articulation of a language, what can it be? And that is something that should be discussed. How can we go beyond what we have already reached? And that's where we get into artificial intelligence and the social contract, how it transformed the social contract. There again, I go a little bit far. a social contract, a society is necessarily, and artificial intelligence and other developments are increasing that element, is necessarily a hierarchy. There are hierarchical levels and there are elites. And we have to wonder, what are the elites of that world that is being born in front of us? You have the business of the AI, artificial intelligence, of the machines. Those businesses have an elite. The people who are managing those businesses, and their interest is profit, power, competition, monopolistic, and so on. You know that. Then you have a second elite, which is the political elite, the politicians who are managing the society and trying to work with the businesses or the business elite so that the society can go smoothly. And it is law and order, the perennity of the politicians, and it can lead to what some people call tyrannical tyranny, a tyrannical situation. And the third one are the AI controlled, those that are controlled by artificial intelligence. And there we have questions more than characteristics, questions about freedom, about satiety, freedom, that's the circuses, and satiety, that's the bread and circuses. And are those bread and circuses, are they cathartic? We don't know. What the question is today is, will 1 and 2 be able to work separately or together to control 3? And 3 is a great mass of people. To control 3, or are 3 going to get into some kind of struggle to change the politician, to change the business model, and so on and so on? What so many people say, the revolution is for tomorrow morning. That we don't know and we can't answer. One thing is sure, is that if there is a way to get out of this, to assume this situation and do something creative with it, the only way is that individuals and collective groups should have to come together to invent a new creativity. And I insist, it's not individuals who are autonomous one by one and just haphazardly together. It is individuals within a lot of collective groups and like unions, parties, a cultural organization, and so on. It is the collective dimension of the individuals that will create or bring the creativity of tomorrow. Science and technology developed along their own phylogeny. We must understand that. Should we go against it? Can we go against it? Can we go against fast trains? Can we go against planes? And so on. That leads to AI and experiential learning, artificial intelligence, can we stand it, and so on, within the school, within education. I skip. You come to the AI classroom, and that is more interesting. The classroom of tomorrow, after the COVID-19 pandemic, will not be the classroom of yesterday, before the pandemic. And at the same time, we must understand that what I'm going to say there, that new AI class or classroom, AI communication, was already at work 10 years ago when it started appearing. What is an exploded AI class? an open classroom. An open classroom, here's a classroom of, let's say, 25 students, but those 25 students are organized and self-organize in groups of 2 or 3 students, and within the general topic, the general syllabus of the class, which is decided by the institution, the teacher, then the students, the group of students are going to choose particular topics, particular parts of the syllabus that they're going to explore, and to explore within guided self-learning. You must understand that the Chinese are on this concept of guided self-learning, have been for 10 years, and we haven't even opened the door in the West. We are behind times, not because China is, it's because humanity is ahead of us. In China, we have to catch up. Guided self-learning is the education of tomorrow morning. What is a guided self-learning classroom or class? You have the different groups. They work separately with all possible means to look for knowledge around the topic that they are working on, to bring it together, to analyze it, to use all kinds of tools to build up some kind of structured vision of the topic they were working on. And then the students, of course, can have all kinds of help from machines, but also from the teacher. And that's where the teacher is essential. He is going to be the guide. He is going to be the guide of those kids who are looking for knowledge all by themselves on the WEB or WWW. The students control their own learning process within the syllabus of a class. And what is important is that all the work of the learners has to be collaborative. And the teacher has to check it really is. It's not one in a group of 3 that works, it's the 3 who works. And then what is essential is the second moment when the classroom becomes the locally of the class, because the class comes together and the various groups present their own discoveries and their own what they have found out and studied, and they confront those things and they try to look for some kind of way to integrate the different parts of knowledge. And that is the second part, where the class is in the classroom. And then the role of artificial intelligence machines is, of course, essential all along this process, at every single moment of this process. And the kids must have access to all those machines. And that's a problem that is educational, but which is also social, because we know that vast sections of our population in the West, and if we take the world, in the world is even more important than in the West, those sections of the population that do not have access to the uppermost technology in the field. And that's what used to be called digital divide. There were international conferences in Geneva. I was a translator in one of them, interpreter, sorry, in one of them, on the subject. And the subject is not so far from it. The digital divide is deep and particularly crucial, even in countries as advanced as the US or Europe. Must we keep up at least some rulelessness? And that is a concept that I'm going to more or less close upon. This is a publication of Guided Self-Learning. The publisher, as you can see on the picture, is Chinese, and the publishing is 5 or 6 years old. That is a long time before COVID-19. Then Guided Self-Learning where I have said what is essential. The point is that the teacher is a guide. Now, and it's not in my PowerPoint, imagine now that you introduce virtual reality in a class. I am expecting, I know that the Chinese are already experimenting on that, that Boeing is using it for the training of his pilots, virtual reality in a class. Can you imagine a teacher today, boys and girls, and let's take only 12 of them, we are going to go to the virtual reality classroom. We enter that classroom, everyone puts their goggles on, and we enter a world that is determined by the topic or the syllabus of the class. And then what happens? The teacher goes along with the students. The students are going to be in their virtual reality. They're going to decide to have personae of their own and to have avatars of their own. And the teacher about that. Is he going to have a persona, or is he going to have an avatar? And how is it going to work? What are the relation then between the teacher and the student in that virtual reality, where actually there is no authority, in quotes, that is, where everyone can do practically everything they want, when a little boy can become a little girl, or why not a dog, why not a dinosaur, or whatever they want. How are we going to integrate that kind of tremendous technology in our classroom, in our schools? And yes, we have to go back to school. Oh yes, we do have to go back to school to learn, because we are the students in that case. We have to learn how to make school what it should be within the technology of tomorrow.
Rosangela.
Yes.
There, let's go to the conclusion. It's very simple. It is thank you. You can see that I've been a little bit fast. Of course, I haven't said everything. That doesn't matter. You have my email. If you want the paper, I can send it to you. It is a little bit important, let's say. And let's have discussion about that. Maybe we should have a virtual reality workshop. That would be funny to try to see what we could do in that virtual reality system. Okay, if I think I'm going to stop there.
Thank you very much, Professor Jacques. Very, very interesting talk. Very disturbing, I would say, with a lot of food for thought. Really, I think we could have maybe 5 minutes, only 5 minutes, really, because we have another round table just after this. But maybe 5 minutes, if you agree. Okay, so I think Professor Marcos is already asking to speak. Yes, so Professor Marcos.
Yes, no, I would like to congratulate Jacques for the beautiful talk. And I'd like to point out that there are several parallels between your talk and mine in terms of the role of dialogic communication in evolution, the existence of hierarchical levels in thought, the manipulative elite, the need for open classrooms, guided self-learning, collaborative learning, active methodologies, and also technology at school. I didn't go into virtual reality, but I have seen in Canada, and I was really struck by that. I think that has a beautiful learning potential for the new times, and also eye tracking. And you know that there is eye tracking together with virtual reality, which opens a new realm of possibilities. It's so many possibilities that we can explore. I was enchanted by your talk. Thank you very much.
Well, I don't have much to add. Just say, yes, I agree.
Yeah.
And I was thinking of your talk, which was before mine, but I was thinking of the talk of our Belgian colleague yesterday, Maurice. We are on the same line. I mean, there are a few lines that are appearing in our intellectual community. The point is that we have to have debate. I disagree. I severely disagree with Harari, for instance. You more agree with him. There are discussion. We have to have discussion.
No, let me just make you a point. I said when I mentioned Harari, there are controversies, but you have to recognize that's a beautiful work of integration and disseminative science.
Yeah.
This is a point, no matter whether, that's why it became so popular, because he brought this amount of information. There may be, of course, controversies billions of years ago. He starts in the Big Bang. But he is really something in the sense that he is presented, because I think we scientists have been in the ivory tower too long. That's a point. And
Sure.
is making this effort. And of course, you're going to make mistakes when we get out of the ivory tower. But I think this is something you've got to do. This is a challenge.
Yeah, that's the point, and we have to get out of what you call an ivory tower. We have to get out into the real world, and to get out into the real world with virtual reality, which would be the best thing to do. To have a virtual world on one side and the real world, and manage to try to bring them together. And that is, if you follow Jaron Lanier and all those people who have been the inventors of virtual reality, it is for them nearly impossible, and it has to become possible. And that's the challenge today. And there we see, yes, we're 2 minutes before midnight, because it had to be done. Because if we don't do it, you can be sure that the Chinese will do it, the Russians might do it, and so on and so on. And then we're going to be what? Behind everything. We have to move our asses a little bit.
Let's do it then. And virtual reality and eye tracking can go together. It's beautiful too. I can send you some information on that.
Yeah.
Yes, I don't have any raised hands so far. I actually, Marcus had a raised hand, like physically. So if someone is raising his hand physically and I haven't seen it, just pop in. But here in Google Meet, I can't see any raised hand. So I think there is, yeah.
There's a round table now, right? So
yes, that's it. That's what I was going to say. Just so we keep our schedule, I think we should move our round table. So I have, we have now a round table with Professor Leonor Scliar-Cabral, Professor Angela Pinheiro, and Dr. Douglas Vilhena. And the round table is Schoolchildren Reading Skill Assessment Battery, Reliability, Validity, and Standardization. So I will close my mic and the floor is yours.
Good morning, all. First of all, thank you very much for being here. It's a great honor to be here with you today in this remarkable, already memorable. I am also very happy to have Professor Leonor Scliar-Cabral and Douglas Vilhena as speakers in this table, both with whom I have long-standing collaboration. The collaboration with Professor Leonor and me has now a story as it started in 2010. The same applies to Douglas, whose work I have the pleasure of having supervised from 2012 till 2021, when he became a doctor in the 19th of May exactly. So in 2012, he joined my lab, the lab of cognitive psychology at the Department of Psychology at the Federal University of Minas Gerais. So we will start now with the first talk, which is going to be presented by Professor Leonor Scliar-Cabral, and the title of her presentation is Validating Scliar's Early Literacy System, a Grapheme-Phoneme Relation Task. Welcome, Professor Leonor.
Okay. Thank you for the invitation for participating at this roundtable, and I will begin my speak, which is about validating Scliar's early literacy system, a grapheme-phoneme relation task. The main purpose of this presentation is discussing Scliar's early literacy development system. First, validity evidence method. 16 subjects, 10 girls and 6 boys, comprise the experimental group, mean age 6.02, and 16 subjects, 7 girls and 9 boys, form the control group, mean age 6.10. At the experiment beginning, the experimental group was submitted to an intervention program based on Scliar's early literacy development system. 2 master degree students, Miriam Maia de Araújo Pereira and Lidiomar José Mascarello, developed the experiment guided by Scliar-Cabral during 2011. They visited the experimental group school twice each week. After this intervention, both groups read aloud a list of 38 pseudo words with 4 or 5 graphemes, which is one of the tasks that compose the battery of reception and production of verbal language. Each pseudo word was signaled by the experimenter. The task was designed to assess children's ability to convert a grapheme into its correspondent phoneme. After this intervention, both groups read aloud the list of 38 pseudo words with 4 or 5 graphemes, which is one of the tasks that compose the battery of the reception and production of verbal language. Each pseudo word was signaled by the experimenter. The task was designed to assess children's ability to convert a grapheme into its correspondent phoneme. Each word was built to measure written words' recognition specific abilities. Neuroscience demonstrated that neurons in mammals are programmed to process the visual signal symmetrically, since for survival it is economically efficient to disregard the differences that may eventually exist between cues to the left and to the right side, or between bottom and top for perceiving any object at sight. So, in order to develop early literacy, visual neurons must be recycled for recognizing those visual differences, sometimes the sole one between 2 letters, as for instance in this stimulus Pseudo, which could be read as Budo or Kudu instead of the correct Pudu, if the child's reading neurons had not been recycled by an efficient early literacy. With the Zogo stimulus, we were testing whether the child, instead of recognizing the letter that performs the grapheme, which represents the phoneme, I will realize it, Z, reading Zogo, guesses the word, accessing Zogo, Jogo, sorry, directly in her phonological mental lexicon. On the other hand, if she have been taught by the letter name, she would read the third grapheme G as J, and the second and fourth O as O, with letter name phonemes. So we'll read Zoja instead of Zogo, which was the correct one. The experimental group, 16 subjects, were first grader students at a private primary school in Florianopolis, Inglese's neighborhood. The researchers identified that the two subjects who failed to become early literate showed cognitive and behavioral problems, which required more serious intervention. Most of the subjects' families lived in the neighborhood and consist largely of self-employed workers and service providers. Regarding the parents' education level, most of them had completed high school and a minority had some higher education. The teacher was trained in pedagogy with specialization in early childhood education and initial elementary education, and had served as a teacher for 4 years. It was the first time that she had taught first grader children using Scliar's early literacy development system. The control group, 16 subjects, were first grade students at a private primary school in another neighborhood from Florianopolis, called Santinho. Most of the subjects' families lived there and consisted largely of public education employees and business executives. Regarding the parents' education level, most of them had higher education. The teacher was trained in pedagogy with specialization in early childhood education and initially elementary education. She had been working with elementary grade students for 8 years, 4 of them with early literacy learning, adopting Emilia Ferreiro's Piagetian approach. There was no researchers' intervention in the control group. The experimental and intervention research began in 2011. Before starting it, the researchers obtained consent from the school chief officers and from the children's parents. The second step was establishing the theoretical fundamentals for the experimental group teacher, as well as her training for intervention with children. The training was offered twice a week. On the first day, the weekly plan was discussed and activities organized together with learning materials, and theoretical questions were answered. On the second day, the two researchers worked directly at classroom, observing teacher and students' performance and intervening in the activities. The research instruments included a psychosocial linguistic questionnaire to develop a profile for each subject and the instruments of pedagogical intervention already mentioned and the assessment instrument. At the end of the experiment, the battery reception and production of verbal language was applied in both groups to assess the effects of the intervention using Scliar's early literacy development system. The battery consisted of 9 tests as follows. The auditory reception test aimed at detecting whether the subject perceived the phonetic features that distinguish word meanings in Brazilian Portuguese. The experimenter sat behind the child and said a word which the child had to match to one of 6 pictures. The oral sentence comprehension test aimed at evaluating the subject's competence understanding either simpler sentences or more complex ones. Experimenters sat behind the child and said a sentence which the child had to match to one of 4 pictures. The word oral production test, matching with pictures, aimed at detecting the subject's control of their social linguistic variety articulating gestures. Experiment point to one of 6 pictures, and the child had to label it. The sentence oral production test, matching with pictures, aimed at detecting the subject's competence to plan and execute either simpler sentences or more complex ones. Experiment pointed to one of 6 pictures, and the child had to produce a sentence. Grapheme-Phoneme test. The subject had to read aloud a Pseudoword with 4 or 5 graphemes signaled by the experimenter and designed to assess the subject's ability to convert a grapheme into its corresponding phoneme, following the Brazilian principles alphabetic system principles. The Brazilian Portuguese alphabetic system principles, and or their ability to perceive written features distinguishing each letter from the others, in particular, letters that mirror each other. The Pseudoword was also designed to provide evidence if the subject had been taught by global methods, and if so, she guessed a word by accessing directly his/her mental lexicon. For instance, the pseudo-word in English, Sid, would be read as sit instead of Sid, or if indeed the subject had been taught by letter labeling, and consequently she disobeyed the phonemic value of the grapheme conditioned by the context, pronouncing the sounds that the letter name evoked. For instance, the pseudo word in English could would be read as should instead of could. Phoneme grapheme test. The subject had to point to one of 5 specially designed words after hearing an oral stimulus delivered by the experimenter to verify in an controlled manner whether the learner had automated the coding rules of phonemes into graphemes. Observe the 5 first words of the test in this blue line, from which the subject must choose after hearing the oral stimulus, Pseudo. So here are the 5 written pseudo words: Pseudo, Budo, Kudo, Lopa, and the last one is not a pseudo word, is an existent word, Puji. Depending upon which item the subject pointed to, the experimenter could infer whether the subject was illiterate when she systematically pointed to the pseudo word whose graphemes did not represent the stimulus phonemes. For instance, in the list of 5 bold words, when the experimenter said Pseudo, if she pointed to Lopa, this would indicate an absence of coding rules. One could also verify if the subject was unable to convert phonemes into graphemes. When listening to an unfamiliar word, she was only able to write memorizing words pointing systematically to words that were already in her mental lexicon. For instance, if the experimenter said pseudo word in English, sit, and the subject signaled the word sit. In the list of 5 bold words, when the experiment said Pudu, she pointed to Puji. I could in English, and in Portuguese, an existent word. The next test was reading aloud a story. This test allowed the experimenter to check whether the subject had or not automated the rules for grapheme-phoneme correspondence, presenting fluent reading with appropriate intonation patterns, and whether she showed no inadequate pauses or hesitations, or on the contrary, whether she showed pauses or hesitations, detecting this fluency. The reading passage was an unknown fictional narrative containing a setting, 3 characters, and 3 episodes, one of them with dialogue. The other test, the final test, was reading comprehension test. The story was read silently. Then there were correct and incorrect inferences from the story material, among which the child had to mark the correct ones. Results. The application of the oral auditory reception, oral sentence comprehension, oral word production, and sentence oral production test results demonstrated that there was no significant differences between the experimental group and the control group. Only those in which the Scliar's early literacy development system came into play showed significant differences in the other tests. However, taking into consideration the number of tests applied and for sake of brevity, only the detailed results for one of the tests is presented in this Congress, the Grapheme-Phoneme correspondence test. It is, however, worth noting that among the 16 subjects in the experimental group, 12 of them became literate after 7 months of exposure to Scliar's early literacy development system, and only 4 did not, for reasons to be explained later. At the end of the experiment, the 12 subjects who did attain literacy were able to fluently read a story presented, filmed, and was their performance. Read a story presented to them for the first time. Their performance was filmed and recorded. The readings were phonetically transcribed and then analyzed according to categories to detect lack of fluency. Only one of the subjects in the control group managed to read with fluency. Of the 4 subjects in the experimental group who did not develop early literacy, the first one, after 2 months of the school year start, moved with his family to Uruguay and only returned in October, having not been instructed with Scliar's early literacy development system. The second subject started attending school only in April, observed that the Brazilian elementary school starts in February, when the other students were already well advanced in the system. In addition, the child's family, unlike other students' families, never attended the school meetings, and there was no learning reinforcement at home. The other 2 subjects who failed to become literate showed cognitive and behavioral problems that required more serious intervention, as mentioned previously. An inclusion policy in Brazil results in such children receiving equal attention from the teacher, but she is not able to give them the special treatment. Data for the Grapheme-Phoneme test are shown in figure 1 with the following hypothesis. Null hypothesis. The Grapheme-Phoneme test average values of the 2 groups are statistically identical, and the differences between them are determined randomly. Hypothesis 1. The Grapheme-Phoneme average values of the group that use the Scliar's early literacy development system are statistically greater than the average values for the group that did not use this system. Using the confidence level of 5%, alpha equals 0.05, with degree of freedom 30, we obtain a p-value of 0.01 as a result of a t-test, independent samples, 2 tailored tests, equal variances. This value is below the limit for acceptance of the null hypothesis, that is p greater than a equals 5%. Thus, there is no more than 1% chance that the difference between the average of data from the two classes are randomly determined. The effect size was large, with a coherence D value of 0.97. The test results indicate that the application of Scliar's early literacy development system influenced the experimental group performance. And then please show the figure 1. You can see the results plotted in the Grapheme-Phoneme test. And I will comment this figure. Correct answers total number given to 38 questions reflecting Grapheme-Phoneme correspondences for two independent groups of subjects. The triangular points show the results for the experimental group that used the Scliar early literacy development system, and the squared points show the control group that used Emília Ferreiro's Piagetian approach. Within each group, the points are ordered from the lowest to highest scores along the x-axis. As can be seen from figure 1, only one subject belonging to the experimental group got all the answers correct, and two belonging to the experimental group and the control group got almost all the answers. But the performance of the other 8 subjects in the experimental group was better than that of the following 3 subjects in the range. And the following 2 subjects in the experimental group performed better than the next 10 subjects in the control group. The 4 subjects belonging to the experimental group who fared the worst have already been discussed in this paper. According to Paulo, now I go to the final remarks. According to Paulo Montenegro Institute's classification, there are 4 levels of functional literacy. Level 1, illiterate, who can perform simple tasks involving decoding of words and phrases. Level 2, rudimentary level, who can read titles or phrases with explicit information. Level 3, basic level, who is able to read a short text with explicit information or requiring a low inference processing. And level 4, full level, who is able to read longer texts, to find and to relate more information, comparing several texts and identifying sources. The number of functionally literate individuals in Brazil are alarming. 6% of illiterate persons are found in the age group 15-64 years, 21% in the rudimentary level, 47% at the basic level, and only 26% in Brazil. We can tell that only 26% understand the text that circulate socially. Only 26%. This means that only 26% of Brazilians can be considered to be included in the contemporary society, the information society. Not to mention this society that Jacques explained. Additionally, the PISA report, this is an old report that I am calling attention to, from 2011, low performance of Brazilian students in the 15-year-old age group in language, mathematics, and science. All this data led us to question the educational policy in Brazil for early literacy development, the level that decides future students' reading and writing competence. We sought, therefore, to investigate what programs had achieved the best result in preventing functional illiteracy and the advances made by science to better understand the processes involved in reading and their learning. As a consequence, we designed Scliar's early literacy development system aimed at personnel involved with literacy forming and training, as well as the teaching materials for children preparation. As it turned out, the design is based on a new approach to phonological awareness development, expanding it with developing the ability to delimit words, including clitics, as well as assigning stress in the words. It is particularly important to distinguish between phonemic awareness and sound discrimination. This Scliar training program was inspired by Vilhena's work, 2009, who has reported fMRI data. Emphasis is focused on vision neuronal recycling for automating the recognition of the direction and articulation of figures, really the invariant figures that distinguish letters. Another contribution was drawn from Montessori's concept of multisensory learning, in which the more senses are triggered, the better the learning. So, extending Montessori's ideas, vision, hearing, touch, proprioception, and kinesthetic senses are driven to help the child's direction of letter features, invariant recognition, and the Grapheme-Phoneme association. However, this system needed to be validated, which occurred during the 2011 experiment reported in this presentation. The data discussion referred namely to the Grapheme-Phoneme test, which demonstrated Scliar's early literacy development system positive effect on the experimental group compared to the control group. For this part, this subject has remembering to read aloud the Pseudoword with 4 or 5 graphemes signaled by the experiment and designed to assess the subject's ability to convert a grapheme into its corresponding phoneme, following the Brazilian Portuguese alphabetic system principles, and or his/her ability to perceive written figures that distinguish each letter from the others, and in particular, mirroring. The test results indicated that the application of Scliar's early literacy development system influenced the experimental group's performance, since the effect size was large, with a coherence d-value of 0.97. The 4 subjects recording belonging to the experimental group, I ask people to interrupt their phones. Thank you. Who fared worse have already been discussed as displaying problems in their exposure to the intervention or having cognitive and behavioral problems. These results are similar to those obtained in the test of reading aloud, although the data were not presented in the current presentation. In this test, categories were computed as number of full and empty pauses, repetitions, guessing, closed external sandy rupture, and mistakes. It was also checked if the reader had monotone or expressive reading. The experimental results validated Scliar's early literacy development system and indicated the need to redesign early literacy development methods, supporting teachers involved in it and developing suitable teaching material for the student. And finally, the references. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Leonor, very much for this important, sophisticated, and interdisciplinary work, which has many, many implications, and many of them related, as you said at the end of your talk, to the redesign of the methods of teaching literacy in Brazil. Now it's my turn. I'm going to talk about a battery of tests. But first of all, Douglas, let me read the title of the presentation. I'm going to talk about a reading recognition test and a Pseudoword recognition test, and a scale of evaluation of reading comprehension by the teacher. These are 3 reading tests which compose a bigger battery formed by other 2 tests. Please, Lucas. The next. Psychologists, neuropsychologists, all involved in the reading assessment, in fact, must carry out the reading assessment based on scientific evidence. The reading assessment instruments should, in the first place, be elaborated according to cognitive models of word recognition. So, in this way, you concentrate on the background, on the theoretical side of the test you intend to devise. Go through the psychometric processes of reliability and validity, and once the instruments is reliable and validated, it should go through the processes of creating the standards. That is, provide standardization with representative sample of children. In this case, of the battery I'm going to present. One fact which is linked with what Professor Leonor has just said is that the reading assessment in Brazil is carried out with informal exams, tasks, and scales, which all have scarce psychometric evidence. Of course, there are good tests in Brazil. They are now appearing more and more, but many of them have problems with the size of the sample, the form of selecting the sample, and many of them lack the psychometric evidence desired. The Brazilian Portuguese has orthographic transparency in the direction of reading, that is in the Grapheme-Phoneme correspondence, so it's reckoned as a regular orthography like Spanish, like the Italian orthography, like the German orthography. And the implication of reading in a transparent orthography is that the children can read very well. They are highly accurate when it comes to correction of reading. And there are plenty evidence in Portuguese and other languages as well, but this figure I'm going to give now is for the Portuguese reading by our children. It's about 9% of words read correctly. So the implication of this, that measure only accuracy in a test is not enough, because it is not satisfactory to discriminate reading performance. In fact, most of the reading tests in Brazil, they only measure accuracy, and it is in this point that rests the main problems with many measures. So you need to measure accuracy and also some time of reading time processing, which can be reaction time. Also, it can be accuracy rate, which is the measure we have chosen in our studies, which accuracy rate refers to the number of words or sentences read correctly per minute. The purpose of my talk today is to present the psychometric evidences of reliability and validity of a reading battery. In fact, what I'm going to do, I'm going to talk about three tests of this battery, and Douglas is going to talk about the psychometric. Yes, I lost it. What happened, Douglas? Oh.
I think Douglas is going to have the presentation back. Yes.
Okay, let's wait. Well, I'm going to talk about 3 tests. The tests developed by myself. And Douglas is going to talk about the psychometric evidences for these tests. As well, he's going to present briefly 2 other tests. One of them, oh, here they are. There is something missing here, Douglas. It's not complete, this. Well, I don't know what happened, but it's not the transparency. It comes now. So, restarting, I apologize. I'm going to present here 3 tests of this battery. And the battery is composed of a word recognition test, a pseudo-word recognition test, a reading test sentence with a comprehension test, and a reading rate test, and a scale of evaluation of reading competence by the teacher. The 4 first instruments, they are a direct measure of the children's performance when they read. And the last one, the scale of evaluation of reading competence, is an indirect measure of reading competence, because it is the teacher who answers the instrument and she rates the performance of the child according to her evaluation, of course, guided by the items of the test. Both the word recognition test and the pseudo-word recognition test, they were developed by myself in 2013. The items of the word recognition test, they were drawn from a database of words read by a sample of 333 children, whose accuracy and reaction time for the reading of each word was measured. This database, it was a big work that I did following a previous word count, where I had the vocabulary to which the Brazilian children were exposed from 1st to 5th grade counted. And I had about over 1 million words in this database. So in a following step, using a computer program, I picked up all the words which were of high and low frequency for children from the 1st to the 5th grade, 2nd to the 5th grade now. So, and as I said, a representative sample of children read this database, which was composed over 300 words, because I picked up the words which were common to all children in terms of frequency of occurrence. And as I said, I measured the reaction time and the accuracy. This database was analyzed via item response theory, which classified the words from medium to high in terms of discrimination index and on 3 levels of difficulty: low, medium, and high level difficulty. So doing that, I ensured that all the words that were present in the word reading task, that they had the desirable, the recommended level of discrimination. It's very important in a psychometric instrument. And as well, the words were balanced in terms of difficulty. I had words which were easy to be read, a great number of medium difficulty, and a few very difficult words. So that's the recommendation. In order to embark all the levels of reading ability. The scores of both instruments are given in terms of accuracy, percentage of words read correctly, and accuracy rate, the number of words read correctly per minute. The word test is composed of 84 isolated words, as you can see in the sheet on the right. 4 items, they are for practice, and then there are 8 items which, in fact, compose the test. There are 3 parallel forms, form A, B, and C. They were printed in black ink on a white background, as you can see from the picture, in a laminated paper, Arial font size 40. Next, Douglas, please. What's happening to Douglas? Douglas? The items of the word recognition tests were further classified according to, as I said, frequency of occurrence, regularity according to Grapheme-Phoneme correspondence. I had words in the end which were classified the same regular words and irregular words, and they were also classified in terms of length. So frequency of occurrence, regularity, and length, number of letters that each word contained were my variable, independent variables. For each word, it was created a corresponding non-word, and which in a group were the items of the Pseudoword reading test. Just to show how these non-words were formed, they came from the word. So for each word of the word reading test, I created a non-word, sometimes changing only one letter, and sometimes, which happened in the bigger words, I changed more than one letter, like in the word purpose.
Mais more 5 minutes.
Okay. So the original classification was improved according to the matrix of increasing complexity in decoding isolated words in the Brazilian Portuguese, work which I have a great pleasure of doing with Professor Scliar-Cabral. Next. I'm not going to get into detail of this classification. Just briefly, the words were classified into regular, semi-regular. The regular words with all graphemes values, independent of the grapheme context. The same regular words, there were words which have one or more than one grapheme, dependent on grapheme context. Next. and the irregular words in which the value of one grapheme is unpredictable. And also there was a fourth category, irregular plus semi-irregular words. In these words, there was a combination of irregular, a irregular correspondence grapheme-phoneme, and a correspondence which depended on the grapheme context. In the end, for the elaboration of the test, we joined the irregular and the semi-regular words in one category, and the irregular and irregular plus semi-regular words in another category, and they were called regular versus irregular categories. So briefly, here is the test and the items. The one thing I did after what I have just said, which was when Douglas became to collaborate with me, in order to get the content validity to the test, we also presented the phonological transcription of each word and each no word. Next, Douglas. And with the collaboration of Douglas, and many times collaborating with him, we did a number of psychometric studies, and I'm very happy to say that they all showed satisfactory psychometric evidence of both reliability and validity. And now, briefly, I'll talk about the scale of evaluation of the reading competence by the teacher. The scale was originally elaborated by myself and my colleague, Belico da Costa, in 2011. It is a tool for teachers to assess silent and aloud reading in Brazilian 2nd to 5th graders. This original version was validated in 3 studies. They're all listed there, one done by Koga Moreira and people from his lab and myself as a collaborator. Lucio and myself, Lucio was a master student, and by myself and my colleague, Belico da Costa. Next, please. So here is the article which we publish. What happened after these studies of validation of the scale? I was not very happy with it still. So when Douglas came along and when we were talking about his project, his master's project, I suggest that he worked on the scale. And then he did a revision of the scale, and then following the scale, the revised scale was applied in a representative sample of children, and it had its final validation and standardization. So this is the name of the test, of the article, which came out of this work. Next, please. So the scale has 2 forms. Form A, which is only for children from the 2nd grade, and Form B, which is for children from the 3rd to the 5th grade. And also it is divided and in two parts, in reading aloud, it tests the reading aloud of the children, and comprehension and silence reading. So here is the items of the scale. I don't have time to go through this, but I'd rather go to the next slide so that I won't use much of my time. I would just like to talk about the revision that this scale went through. It was done, as I said, by Douglas in this master degree. First thing we did was to replace the previous yes and no options of answer for true and false. And we also replaced the binary option of answers by 4 choices, true, false, sometimes, and I don't know. We excluded some items because before you talked about the not so good reader in contrast to the good and poor reader. And we decided to take this category. And then we revised some of the items and excluded 1 or 2, not more than this. And also we did the identification and selection of the best scoring criteria to the new format of the scale. And as I said, this modification they were tested for evidence of validity, reliability, and as Douglas is going to show now, the 3 instruments I've just presented, they gave us just what we expected, good psychometric index. So now I'll pass on the word to Douglas. And I thank you very much for your attention. And I'm going to be here. I expect to answer questions.
Thank you very much, Professor Angela Pinheiro. Professor Angela was my advisor during my master's and during my PhD. So now I helped to develop the reading test battery, composed of the word recognition test, pseudo word recognition test, the Arau, the scale for the teacher, and now I'm going to present the rate of reading test and the reading test sentence comprehension. So I'm going to talk about the reliability, the validity, and the standardization. I'm now, for 2 years, ambassador of Universidade do Porto. I did my sandwich PhD there, my doctor PhD sandwich in Porto, Universidade do Porto. And the reading test battery that I'm going to present to you won the award for young research during the 3rd meeting of School Nurse Psychology of Minas Gerais here at the Federal University of Minas Gerais. I'm in Belo Horizonte, Brazil. We had the funding from Pró-Reitoria de Pesquisa da Universidade Federal de Minas Gerais, from CNPq, PAPEMIG, and CAPES. We are here, Belo Horizonte, our beautiful horizon. We had the approval of the ethical committee from UFMG. We collected a sample all over the city. It was a stratified and randomized sample in all of the city's regions. We collected from the 2nd to the 5th grade of elementary school. So it corresponded to 7 to 11 years old children. 49% boys, so equal distribution of gender. All of them were native speakers of Brazilian Portuguese, and on average, the Raven's general cognitive capacity was on the 76th percentile. So it was classified as above average. As it was stratified, we had the educational secretary here in Belo Horizonte, which provided us a list with all the schools. We were able to randomly select them across the city, 16 state schools, 82 classrooms, 72 teachers, and in each classroom, we randomly selected only a group of children, and we only needed to select 384 participants for the minimum statistical for our standardization studies. However, we came up with 1,289 participants for TELCs, almost 600 for word reading and pseudo-word recognition tests, and EACOL 452 children. And rate of reading tests is not meant to have a standardization, just the reliability and validity evidences. So here's just to summarize all of the reliability and validity of each instrument. So we have 5 instruments: the rate of reading test, pseudo-word reading test, sentence comprehension, rate of reading test, and finally the scale for the teacher. Concerning the reliability index, all of them presented a very high internal consistency. Word reading recognition tests had 0.96 internal consistency, TELCs 0.95 compass alpha, and EACOL from 0.94 to 0.96. These tests had parallel versions, so you can administrate to children different versions of the test, not to influence the order of the items. So all of the parallel forms of each test were non-significant. They were not different from each other. So they provided evidence of reliability for parallel forms. And also the split half, as half of the items, odds versus even items, had also the same results as expected. Concerning the validity, we divided about the content, the internal structure, external validity, and of course the standardization. Just a second. Concerning the content, validity was the most important to base our test, of course, to go to the schools and collect the data. So all of them, we took a lot of time and care to construct each instrument for them to be classified as gold standards. So word recognition tests and pseudo-word recognition tests went through item response theory, phonetic transcriptions, and all of them presented the expected psycholinguistic effects like lexicality, frequency of occurrence, regularity, and extension effects. I'm going to present in details in a few moments. All of them presented very good internal structure. It was very easy to distinguish the mean from each school year. I'm going to present especially with the reading accuracy rate. For the external validity, all of them present very good, from moderate to strong correlation with each other test, and divergent correlations, very weak with other cognitive tests and with behavior tests. The standardization, we provided different tables with percentile to convert to the classification of reading, which I'm going to present in a few moments. First, I'm going to present TELCs with teste de leitura, compreensão de sentenças, It is a translation from Orlec Lecture 3 from Lobro. It was adapted to Spanish. It was adapted to Portugal by Susana and Professor São Luís de Castro, which presented yesterday. And in Portugal, it's called Teste de Idade de Leitura. Here in Brazil, we call Teste de Leitura Compreensão de Sentenças. We had two main publications. The first one was in 2016 in the journal Dyslexia, and in 2020 in Psicologia, Teoria e Pesquisa. The test is simple, it's very easy to administrate. It composes of 40 items. Here is 3 examples. Of course, it is in Portuguese. It evaluates the sentence reading comprehension. It has 40 isolated and incomplete sentences with 5 alternatives to be completed. So in Portuguese, the first one would be: o meu tio, depois de muito estudo, tornou-se jacaré, ninho, médico, senhor, comércio. So the child is supposed to mark médico as his uncle, after a lot of study, turned into a doctor. Well, concerning now the reliability index of the word recognition tests, then I'm going to present to the other tests. So as I told, it has equivalence between forms A, B, and C. Internal consistency, very high, above 0.85, even we consider the high frequency of low frequency, semi-regular, irregular, length, short, medium, and large words. And also, of course, as I told, the split half method, Spearman Brown 0.95. Concerning the validity evidence, just let me. I have two. The psycholinguistic effect is, I'm going to present, it's easier to present in the graphic. First, the internal consistency between word recognition test and pseudo word recognition test. If you merge all of the items, we had a very, very high internal consistency, also close to the maximum, 0.98. Now concerning the psychometric evidence for the TELCs, the reliability, it has a very high Compass alpha and very strong Spearman-Brown coefficient and non-significant difference between the cohorts that we tested. So it was the same values between 2015 and 2018. Probably after the return of schools, after the pandemic ends, probably we are going to expect a lower average in our sample here in Belo Horizonte. These are the correlations between the tests, which vary between moderate to strong. The strongest correlations were, of course, with tests that measures time. So correlations were strong between the accuracy rates of words and sentence per minute, of course. And the divergent correlations with behavior, as it has negative behavior, demonstrate negative influence in reading. The distribution of the accuracy of word recognition tests has negative asymmetry and leptokurtosis. So it demonstrated a schooling effect, although it had an overlap of the internal confidence intervals between the means of each grade school. However, as you can see in the graphic, all of the samples on average scores above 90% of accuracy. However, if we consider the accuracy rate, we were able to have a normal distribution with symmetric and mesocotic curve, and the schooling effect very significant and no overlap of the interval confidence intervals. So it was very easy to distinguish second grades from the third grade, from the fourth grade, and of course, from the fifth grade. The same occurred with the pseudo-word recognition test, which the variable accuracy has a very negative asymmetry, so all the sample accumulate in the right side of the graphic. And if we measure the accuracy rate, so the accuracy during the time to perform the test, we had a normal distribution with no overlap of the confidence intervals. As Professor Angela mentioned before, we were able to construct our tests with different psycholinguistic variables, starting from computing frequency of occurrence of word and in textbooks exposed to Brazilian children in the early years of elementary schools, published in 96 and republished in 2015 by Professor Angela. With the database, we were able to construct the word and pseudo-word recognition test. We were able to have a very strong lexicality effect. So the word had a very strong effect above 0.82 in the accuracy and 1.14 effect size with accuracy rate between the difference of reading word and reading pseudo words. So it is easier to read words than it's counterbalanced pseudo word. So this was the first effect expected when we compared both tests. If we compare the word recognition tests alone, we were able to detect the frequency effect with so high frequency words. So high frequency words were read with more accuracy than low frequency words. We also were able to detect the regularity effect, so higher accuracy in reading regular words compared to irregular words. And of course, the length, as it is easier to read short words than long words. Concerning the pseudo word recognition test, of course, we only have two effects, the lexicality effect that I demonstrated and the length effect, which also had a moderate effect compared the short and versus the long pseudo words. As pseudo words won't have the number 2 and 3 here, the frequency effect and regularity effect. Only the length effect in the pseudo word. Now changing the instrument, we were able to validate and adapt the rate of reading test called teste de taxa de leitura. It's the easiest test that we were able to construct. It has 15 easy words, very high frequency of occurrence. It evaluates the reading only 1 minute for each lists. So it is very fast to evaluate the assessment. And during our content validity research to construct the test, we had all of the words presented in the frequency of occurrence in Brazilian Portuguese. We only selected the ones exposed to the first grade students, only the high frequency of occurrence. from 2 to 4 letters. We then went to the first round with judges, external and independent judges, to judge each word of a list. So they determined that they excluded the words that they expected to be difficult for children to read. Then we went to another round. We went to the schools and tested 45 good readers, and none of them and all of them read correctly a list of 15 vocabulary, 15 words that we composed our tests. So our tests: ar, já, pé, dia, lua, mar, ovo, pão, rei, rua, uva, bala, fada, time, vida. All of the children correctly read these words. So we found, after a long journey, that probably these are a group of 15, the easiest 15 words to compose our test. Of course, Portuguese has easier words, but to have an equivalent with the English version, we came up with these 15 words for the test. All of the tests, we provided a easy conversion from the rough score to the percentile and to the correspondence reading performance. So for TELCs, you can classify from grade, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, and also with chronological years, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11 years old. I'm here only showing the school year table. We are able to now classify the children with disorder, with a percentile from 0 to 10 to the 10th percentile, difficulty to 14 percentile, a difficulty from 15 to 29 percentile, mean from 30 to 59, 60 to 89, and superior reading above 90 in the 90 percentile. Also, we're able to construct for the word and pseudo-word reading recognition test, both for the accuracy variable and for the accuracy rate variable. Also for the EACOL, the scale of evaluation of reading competence by the teacher. In this standardization study, we merged the 4th and the 5th grade. They lacked significant difference of reading performance according to the teacher. So it is easier to distinguish the 2nd from the 3rd and the 3rd from the 4th and the 5th. With the discussion, we were able, after a long journey that I started in 2012 with Professor Angela Pinheiro, along the way, it had the support of Professor Emeritus Leonor Scliar-Cabral, which I thank. All of this journey with my master's and my PhD, we were able to provide satisfactory psychometric evidence of reliability and validity according to the cognitive models of word recognition. The norms were created from a randomized and stratified sample with strong statistical size and normal distribution. And there is a need to develop standards for different types of schools, municipal and private schools, and in different regions of Brazil, as we only evaluated state schools in Belo Horizonte. We were able to attend 3 of the 4 diagnostic criterion for specific learning disorder with impairment in reading. So the criterion A, a specific persistent deficit in reading with word reading accuracy, reading rate or fluency, and reading comprehension. Also able to, on the criterion P, to provide psychometric evidence of an individual administered, psychometrically sound and culturally appropriate test of academic achievement that is norm referenced, and the criterion C, early onset, that we are able to detect from the 4th to the 5th school grade. As most of you here in Psycholinguistics are familiar with the reading aloud dual root model, the phonological root and the lexical root. Concerning our instruments, we were able to evaluate in isolation each part of the model, of this computational model. So EACOL, TRP, it is more to the orthographic input lexicon. EACOL entails evaluate the semantic system, of course, reading comprehension. And EACOL, TRP, TRPP, and RRT, they evaluate the phonological root. Here are our published articles, the main reference for these instruments. Here are the 5 chapters that is gonna be included in Professor Jerusa Salles and Ana Luisa Nava's book that is gonna be published in this semester. There I finish my presentation, and now I can join the round table with Professor Emeritus Leonor Scliar-Cabral and Professor Angela Pinheiro. Thank you very much for your attention during the presentation. Tudo bem, Angela?
Okay, so if we have questions, you can either raise your hand, or you can write them on the chat, or you can just switch on your mic and start speaking. I see that Professor Maria da Graça raised her hand. So Professor Maria da Graça, you can start maybe.
Good afternoon, all of you. Good morning in Brazil. Well, I have 2 questions. I will begin with Douglas, just to ask you why you have chosen the Ravens test.
The Ravens are the
Ravens test, yes. And when you say that the scores you have obtained were above average, have you had in consideration the Flynn effect?
The Flynn effect?
Flynn effect.
Flynn, of course, the Flynn. We were also able to construct an article, manuscript with the Ravens. It depends. We were able to detect the Flynn effect as the scores that in our sample were above average. It was expected to be on average. We had a randomized sample across the city. So the Raven, we consider it to be a relative easy test.
Yes, it's relative easy now.
It was. I hope it still is.
Well, now when you tested it, I don't know. You know what I mean with the Flynn effect.
Yes, maybe
it changes with generations. It changes with generations. It changes with experiences. Children now are much more used with the material that makes the test easier. So I don't know if the test is how do you say, calibrado.
It's still valid, but
for the moment.
If we were able to administered VISC or Vice intelligence test. We had the opportunity to have more time. But the Raven, it's a good test just to screen, as it takes on average 10 minutes to administrate in a group of 10 people. So it was just a screening to exclude the children with intelligent deficit.
Okay. Well, it was a doubt
Okay,
that
and
I
I
had.
hope that we can publish an article with our sample, but considering that the sample is from 2015 and 2018.
Because as it was the most difficult test some years ago, to say that is above average now.
It's above average.
It needs an explanation why there is such a spring like that. I don't know. Well, it was just a question.
It's just
and I have another one to Professor Leonor Scliar-Cabral. Do you listen to me?
Professor Leonor, yes.
Yes, I am listening.
Okay.
Do it, please.
Your control group was following Ferreiro's system, alphabetic system, reading system, isn't it? Ferreiro's system. Your control group.
I did not understand very well your question.
Well,
what is it about?
Your experimental group was with your system, and your control group was with the Ferreiro's system.
The control group, well, if I understood your question, the teacher of the control group followed Piaget. But you see, in a very Brazilian way of constructivism, I think that poor Piaget is suffering in his stomach.
Yes, that's the point.
Okay.
Well,
so,
what I think...
What in Brazil teachers caught from really the Emilia Ferreiro vision, even she was very, very much angry the way her ideas were being used in Brazil, because she never thought that her ideas would be called a method.
That's it. That's
method.
what
She was studying the way children build their thinking about written material, why they built this, their notions about the difference between oral and written
that's what I
communication. Think. And here in Brazil, what they applied that first we must teach how to write your name. Yes, this is the beginning. You must write your name. Secondly, we cannot adopt books as class. They are forbidden. Well, so I understand that many didactic material in Brazil is of very poor quality. But why do we teach our children if it's not to consult books to read. Well, and so very, very, very wrong ideas. And this is the way those that defend Emília Ferreiro's idea in Brazil behave in school. So getting to your point, those children were taught this way.
Well, what I think is unfair, very unfair, is to call it Piagetian.
No, it's for sure, it's a caricaturation. It's a caricature of I agree. It's not.
I think it's.
It is what they themselves call.
But
not,
well,
yes, it's the way they themselves call. When we ask the teacher,
my dear,
we follow Piaget, the way they, but for sure, Maria da Graça, they don't understand anything about the epistemology of Piaget. They don't know what is epistemology.
What I think, Leonor, is perhaps the way Ferreiro began to do something that had nothing to do with a system to learn how to read and write was clinician. And so he followed the method, the Piagetian method for other things, not for that. So I think that, well, it's something that I cannot understand. I go further. I'm always saying that I cannot accept the idea that is Ferreiro's Piagetian method. It's very strong, the idea of putting Piaget in this system.
For sure, no. Let me clarify. This is what the teacher answered when we asked her what were the theory.
Method.
It's not. I think that you are right. We cannot assume her speech to be in ours.
So
and perhaps perhaps in his position, we must make it quite clear that this was her.
Okay, that's
her point of view.
According to the teacher, according to the
teacher.
It was
according to the teacher.
Okay. Then it's fine.
But may I clarify also very well? Still in Brazil, namely, for instance, in São Paulo province, they continue defending that they are applying Piaget ideas, you see, and making this awful work in class.
Mm-hmm.
You see, but they use this, and so since of course Piaget is a respectful science, was, of course, his ideas, we must respect. He made a great contribution in our field, to our field. So people accept that what they are doing is correct. You see, they are using the name of Piaget. You understand? To maintain their position. Even the publishing companies in their editorial board, they are comma. Piagetians.
Professor Leonor, we have our time 94 now. Of course, we can call it Emília Ferreira constructivism, or Emília Ferreira whole word reading, or just Emília Ferreira non-reading system. But we can have the discussion another time, of course. Professor Angela, your microphone. Angela, microphone.
Well, anyway, did I answer your question, Maria da Graça?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
As coordinator of this table, I thank you very much, my dear Professor Leonor Scliar, for your presentation, as well your presentation, Douglas. And I'm afraid the time is finished. There's another section starting now. And would like to thank you very much for your attention. Until next time.
Until next time, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Maria da Graça. Thank you, Host Angela Gabriel. Thank you, President Marcos Maia.
So thank you, everybody. And I'm just reminding you that the other rooms for the symposiums are already open. So we are already monitoring them.
Advancing there, okay.
Yeah, so, yes?
We will reconvene for the general meeting at noon, right? Just confirming.
Exactly, exactly. That's very well reminded, Professor Marcos Maia, that we have a meeting at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, taking Lisbon time. Yes. Noon in Brazil. In Brazil.
5 o'clock for me, and then I'll send a message for you, Rosângela, about this meeting, okay?
Okay.
Adieu,
okay.
Adieu, goodbye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, goodbye, não. Até logo, até logo.
Yeah.
Até logo.
See you all in the other rooms.
Okay.
Just changing screens.
Yes, I know. Bye.
Well,
Bye.
we have 5 minutes. 5 minutes for a little bit of
exercise.